Earthlings, welcome to another show. Now, before we proceed, we've got to do a formal investigation because my equipment reveals that Ronnie is coming to us from the land of Brexit. So that means, unfortunately, that there's now a kind of border. So we have some border control questions. So, Ronnie, before we can proceed, I'm afraid we're going to have to ask just a couple of questions, if you don't mind. I know it's going to slow you up
the thing is
in
also
Dover.
yeah,
So
this show would be horrendously late because I'd be queuing for hours and hours, wouldn't I?
you will be,
Before
yeah.
you were able
It
to
might
answer me
be
the question.
16 hours. So,
Yeah.
is your name Ronnie Lee?
It is indeed.
Okay. And is it true, according to my records, that you spent some years at the pleasure of Her Majesty? Is that true?
Well, I wouldn't like to think I gave her very much pleasure.
No, but you.
But I was certainly in a number of her institutions, shall we say? Yes.
Yes, I think so. Yeah, in some of the houses.
Yeah.
And the third and most important question, Mr. Lee, is: are you still alive?
I seem to be. Yes.
Oh, good. In that case, we can start. Right, so very good. So you're still alive, Ronnie. So that's a relief. So,
I'm still alive. I survived the intro, so yes, I am still here.
you did, yeah. That interrogation at the customs post.
Yeah, I was starting to sweat during that quite a bit.
Now, before we proceed, let's just greet the people in the house. So we've got BC first, then Vegan Humans, Kate J, Paul Hatterley, hello. Canadian Vegan Forever, The Spiritual Vegan, hello. Synot 43, scrolling down. I hate it when you start getting duplicates because it just confuses me. Michael Askew, hello there. That might be Amber, hello there too. Vegan Graham, hello there. And Amber V, is that the same?
Okay, I noticed there's a comment in the chat, someone saying I like steak, except they can't spell steak, and it looks like they'd like to chew on a pointed piece of wood from the way they spelt it.
Yeah, you get that on you get that on TikTok lives, and so I always reply, "What you mean, metal or wooden?"
Okay. They're certainly not a vampire because they don't like that sort of steak, do they?
Right, for the next bit, I've got to don this. Now then. I don't know if you can see that or not.
Sort of, yeah.
I found that.
It's your virtual screen or whatever it is keeps kind of.
Yeah, it always interferes with everything. Yes, I know. Yeah, so I found that when we were beach cleaning, and we had a particularly difficult job, and when I found that, I thought, oh, it might be something to do with Paddy's Day. You know, the Irish call St. Patrick's Day Paddy's Day. But it ended up that there was some exceptionally high tides around Dublin, and so it brought much more rubbish onto the beach. So 2 people were cleaning up the beach, and we managed to recruit another 2. And we didn't find out what the woman was called, but the guy was called Graham, on the grounds that the woman kept going, you'll take that to Graham. And then, and so we ended up with 4 people, which was quite good. But the relevance of this, Ronnie, is that I don't think they were vegan, but they weren't arseholes.
Well, I think I think some people can be arseholes in some ways and not in others, possibly. I mean, the thing is that locally, I mean, we're probably as far from a beach as anywhere can be in England, where I live. But we do have a big litter picking campaign. There's a big litter picking group locally, and lots of that take place. I mean, I've taken part in it myself sometimes. And most of those people aren't vegan. Most of those people aren't vegan that take part in the litter picking. So at least you can say that at least they do something. They should do something, to kind of, I suppose, make the world a better place, and also to help other animals, because the main threat of litter is to other animals, is to wild animals, free living beings. That's the threat. That's the threat that litter poses. But in fact, if people are concerned, say, about plastic pollution, and a lot of the problem from litter is obviously plastic, the most important thing they can do is actually stop eating fish, because almost 50% of the plastic in the ocean, which is where a lot of this plastic would end up anyway if it wasn't actually litter picked, and a lot of it does, sadly, anyway. Almost 50% of the plastic in the ocean comes from the fishing industry. It's discarded nets and other tackle from the fishing industry. So if you care about plastic pollution, then stop eating fish, and preferably, go properly vegan. And this is what I say whenever people go on about plastic and aren't I good, I no longer use plastic straws. I say, well, look, the best thing you can do, go vegan. Stop eating fish
to save the fishes. But
save the fishes. Yeah,
I mean, the two most shocking things I've seen was, first of all, those islands made out of plastic rubbish, which is just a weird thing to see them floating around on the ocean. But then you've also got some footage that scuba divers take when they're swimming through, just big clouds of plastic floating in the ocean, and you just think, how can we have got to that state? Where all that is going on. But
I've got Abby. You see, Abby wants to be the next Bond cat. You see, this is why she constantly appears in these videos that says she'll be kind of noticed by the makers of the James Bond films, isn't it, Abby?
Well, you got to learn to say, no, Mr. Bond, I want you to die.
Yeah. Do you want to? Well, Abby's got to say. Has Abby got to say it, or me?
Oh no, you've got to do it. Yeah. Yeah, it's not.
Do you know? I have never ever watched a James Bond film. I'm quite proud to say. Never watched one.
Oh, okay.
No. And nor do I want to.
I used to be a projectionist, so I didn't have much of a choice. But,
you were forced to watch all sorts of shit, weren't you, as a projectionist? But
yeah, shit is right. Yeah, I mean, but going back to arseholes, did you see what I did there, people? So what have you got in mind about the land of arseholes? I mean,
well, it does appear to be that way, doesn't it? And not just here in the UK, but really throughout the world. We've got a government, the most appalling government you could possibly imagine. So they're a load of arseholes. And then you've only got that government because loads of people voted for them. So they're arseholes. And then most people don't seem to, hardly lift a finger to kind of do anything decent. And certainly they don't lift a finger to do the most important thing they could do, which is to go vegan. Right. So you've kind of got that situation to deal with. And then even amongst people that are vegans, only a tiny percentage of those vegans are actually active, go out of their way to spread the vegan message. So you could say that really kind of quite a lot of people who call themselves vegans are arseholes as well, or have got a degree of arseholism about them, you see. So we're kind of faced in is that a kind of arseholism? Have I invented another word?
Yeah, I'll write that down.
Put that together with all my other words I've invented.
Rescuism. You like rescuism at the end of things, don't you? Yeah.
Suprematrix, that's another one. And I'm sure there's more that I've invented. You probably remember them better than me, Roger.
Yeah, it's all these Ronnie Lee-isms, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. So, we kind of, sometimes it can be incredibly frustrating, when you're someone that, is aware of the appalling situation in the world that is imposed on other animals by the human species, and you desperately want to do something about it, and you're kind of faced with governments that are totally resistant to it. You're faced with people mostly who don't want to know, humans don't want to know, and you're faced with vegans who aren't prepared to get off their arse and do any education. So in that kind of situation, it's a question of like working out, what's the best strategy given that is the situation, what is the best strategy we can adopt to achieve animal liberation? Because I think we have to be realistic about the situation we're in, and kind of not be kind of not be expecting stuff from people that they're really not prepared to prepared to come up with. I think, and in this kind of very limited situation that we're kind of faced with, what is the best way forward? And that's kind of really, what I was wanting to talk about.
I'm surprised you sound like you're accepting that people won't be activists.
No, I'm not accepting that. I'm not accepting that people won't be activists. What I'm saying is that we have far fewer activists than would be desirable. And obviously, the ideal situation is for every vegan to become an activist in some way, in kind of actually, getting out there and in some way and spreading the message. That's kind of what we want. And all the time we have to be. All the time we have to be promoting that. All the time we have to be encouraging and helping other vegans to become active. I think that's really important. But at the same time, we need to be looking at how can we achieve the maximum effect with the minimum number of activists. So we have to kind of do those two things in kind of in tandem. That even if someone's in an area. Like kind of all areas, really, where the number of vegans or activists is very few, and obviously they'd be wanting to recruit more vegans to be activists. But kind of given that there are small numbers, what is the best we can do with those small numbers? What kind of activism can we do with small numbers to make it the most effective?
Yeah, well, we're in danger of getting into personality types again, because there are some people who, how can we put it, not necessarily interested in what objectively would be the best thing to do. I've always got this catch-all phrase for people who want to do things other than vegan education, and I always ask them if they think there's ethical vegans out there, as it were, in society, still to be found. And they always say yes to that. And so given that, if we dried them up, as it were, we'd have a problem. But given the fact that we all assume that there's a lot of people out there who will become ethical vegans, and hopefully a percentage of those will then become activists, then it seems to me that there's nothing more important than going to find them, because most of the things that are a problem for us stem from the fact that the vegan community is too small at the moment. So we've got no political power. We've got no socio-political power in terms of influencing, ideas about things like government subsidies, these kind of things. We're kind of too small to do any of that. And so it seems to me that if there are more vegans to be got, what is more important than getting them?
Well, personally, I don't think there is anything more important than getting them, and and I think that's something that that all vegans should be doing in whatever way they can. And I appreciate this. That there are a lot of people that are into, a lot of vegans that for whatever reason prefer to do pressure campaigns than vegan education. And I think there are various reasons kind of for that, and we've kind of covered that in previous shows. I mean,
perpetuity.
we may well do again. Cover what's kind of going on psychologically.
I know we're in danger of being arseholes about it, really. If you ask me.
Well, you see, I think the thing is that it could be said that at least those people are doing something active. It might be argued that it's not the very best thing they could be doing in terms of activism, but at least they're doing something rather than just kind of putting vegan cake in their mouth. But you see, my view of that is to encourage those people to include vegan education into their into their campaigning. That's what I'd say. I'd say that
that seems to be your model, that vegan education is the best, and yet if you want to do anything other than that, which is your choice, if you incorporate vegan education elements into it, that's the best way to do that other thing as well, right?
Yeah. What I'd say is that vegan education is essential. I probably use the word essential rather than kind of best because you see, and unless we educate a large number of people to go vegan, and in other words, unless we educate a large number of people to believe in animal liberation, to be opposed to the oppression of all sentient life, and the exploitation of all sentient life, and unless we reach that situation where a large number of people believe in that, how on earth are we going to achieve animal liberation? We're not. All we're going to get is like tiny measures, little crumbs from the table of governments. Like the hunt ban that doesn't work, and stuff like that. When the vast majority of other animals on earth are still being oppressed and exploited, and so we kind of have to. This is why vegan education is essential. Whatever other people are drawn to in terms of campaigning for animals, it's important that they realise the fundamental importance of vegan education and to try to incorporate that into everything they do.
Well, what would you say to the people, Ronnie, who says you've got this the wrong way round, in the sense that as soon as we start talking about vegan education, then the spectre of our number one target, which is cultural speciesism, arises. This big ideology that we're all born into, we all get socialized into, and all the rest of it. And animal welfare is kind of part of that kind of upbringing. Don't be cruel, but it doesn't mean you can't use them, and all this kind of stuff. Now, some people would say you want the movement to do the hardest thing first, rather than trying to do some of the easiest things and then building up. So let's try and close down MBR, for example.
Well, the thing is, it kind of is hard. But all these things are hard. Like even if people are involved in pressure campaigns, that's not easy. And the trouble is that like you're going to close down one particular place. Just an example, MBR acres that breed beagles for animal experimentation. The thing is, it's not just about like closing down MBR. You close down MBR, the demand for beagles to be bred for animal experiments still exists, and they'll just be supplied from somewhere else. So it isn't just a case of like closing down one place. You have to close place after place after place after place, and then if they switch to doing the experiments on other animals instead of beagles, then you've got to close those places. So that as well, that's a horrendously long process to really have any impact on that. So even pressure campaigning is this horrendously long process, and difficult process. And the thing is, it's a kind of unless. The thing is that unless we do overthrow cultural speciesism, we aren't going to achieve animal liberation, because the reason we don't have animal liberation is because of cultural speciesism.
Yeah, well, some people would say that, okay, it's going to take a long time to, take out the bricks from the wall and this kind of stuff. But at least when you do that, you get the kind of dopamine hit and the emotional kind of satisfaction and the kind of, that kind of fuck you type thing that is very important for a lot of people. So a lot of people tend to dismiss vegan education in the sense that they can't see much happening.
But
right.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you, but it's nevertheless is the case that stuff is happening. You see that if all of us who became vegan, we become vegan because we received some sort of information. You know, that might have been, with me, it was an article in a magazine. With other people, it's a leaflet. Other people might be a poster or a video or a conversation with someone, or an advert, or all these ways by which information can be conveyed. And quite often it's more than one type of information that somebody would have received before they became vegan. So it's evident from that the more information we can get out there promoting veganism, the more vegans we'll create.
It's kind of invisible, isn't it? I mean, there's a big Go Vegan World blitz at the moment in Dublin.
Yes.
All these billboards have gone up, and they're all over the place. And I'm starting to get, people sending me photographs. Oh, I found one there. I found another one. Oh, And so on their cycle home, they've gone past 4 of them and stuff, and they think, oh, this is great and everything. But you can't. You look at one of those, and you look at the population going past them, and you can't see anything happening.
No,
that's the problem, isn't it?
But we have to. We have to. If we're involved, I mean, I look at it as a war. I mean, that doesn't necessarily mean that I advocate violence, but I look at it as like a concerted struggle. Because things are often called
a pillow fight.
They don't. I mean, this War on Want, for instance, was the name of an organisation campaigning against poverty. That didn't mean they went out with guns, but it's a kind of, and
they went out with spud guns, didn't they?
Yeah, firing potatoes into people's mouths. Yeah. So, like you don't fight wars on emotion. You fight wars on calmly assessed strategy. You calmly work out a strategy that you kind of can come to a sort of logical conclusion that can bring about victory. You don't just run round controlled by emotion. You calmly work out a strategy and say, right, this is the situation. We're gonna employ those tactics and stuff like that. And we need to have more of that in the movement. I think that people are driven by emotion and like going outside a place where animals are oppressed is an emotional response. People will go outside laboratories. They'll go outside slaughterhouses in the middle of nowhere where there's no interaction with the public, because that's where the animals are being killed, because this is an emotional response. But that isn't always, and is more often than not, it's not the best use of our resources, because you have to ask the question, why are the animals in those laboratories? Why are the animals being bred for those laboratories? Why are those animals going into the slaughterhouse, right? And the fundamental reason why that's happening is cultural speciesism, isn't it? That's why that's happening. It's cause and effect. Something's causing that. And so what we need to do is kind of operate at a deeper level and do a hell of a lot more to tackle the actual cause, tackle the reason why those things are happening. And that's done through vegan education.
Yeah, well, I agree with that. I mean, I used to be invited to kind of winter demos in Ireland, and by the time you got there, it was dark and nobody could see you, and we're all kind of stood there like potatoes with signs that nobody can see, and so in a weird way, the fact that cultural speciesism is our target, that's kind of everywhere. So I really latch on to what you were saying about you don't have to be outside an animal abuser, because the culture is all about using other animals. And so, this is what the Earthlings experienced figured out. The fact that you don't have to have your laptops outside a butcher's shop. You can be up the road from there, so you're not causing any immediate kind of conflict, because cultural speciesism is not as though it just exists around the butcher's shop and then you've got these avenues of, where it's not there or something. It doesn't work like that. So we can do vegan education anywhere, because we're always targeting cultural speciesism.
Yes.
We're almost like fishers who are swimming in it.
Yeah, that's right.
The water is it,
But having said what I said, I think that what we're kind of talking about is like raising awareness, and obviously raising awareness in the right way. I think awareness can can be raised through protest, and can be raised through direct action if that's done in the right way. If that's done in the right way, I think that kind of can happen. In other words, if it gets publicity, and if
this is where the kind of press release and the press office and the claims making is absolutely crucial, because the press are liable to get it wrong. So one of the first things you've got to do if you're organizing a protest is to try and make sure that the journalists that you're dealing with don't make any mistakes, which they can easily do, because they'll reduce it down to welfare. They'll think it's something to do with the RSPCA or something. So you've got to be very kind of careful. Like, for example, there's a lot of stress at the moment in your country about the red tractor thing, and I get the impression that what the campaign looks like is I saw a slogan the other day, might have been yesterday, kind of the red tractor is a facade. It implies that what they want is for the red tractor scheme to be working properly, but that's not what they want. So
I think a lot of confusion. I think there's a lot of mixed messages come out of these things. I mean, there was a protest. There was one of these red tractor farms in Warwickshire, where there was a undercover investigation by the Animal Justice Project. It was a pig farm that supplies Tesco, I think, and probably lots of other places. And there was a demo outside, attended by at least 50 people, and I think that got quite a lot of media coverage. But I think you kind of get mixed messaging from these things, because there were a lot of placards there people were holding that had been supplied by the campaign that said "Go vegan" on them. So there is a good "Go vegan" message, but then there's also this message like, close down this farm, close down whatever name was it, Big Hill Farm or whatever the name of it was. You see, and the thing is that like the problem is that if that farm's closed down, it actually makes no difference, because if the demand stays the same for pig meat, then what they'll do is they'll just get that from another farm, and that other farm, to be quite honest, is likely to be just as bad as the one that closed down. You see, so what's happening by that is you're pushing the problem around. But there was a Go Vegan message included with that, which I think was positive. So there's some kind of confusion, there's kind of mixed messaging going on with these things.
Yeah, but Ronnie, just slapping a Go Vegan message onto a welfare message, for example, doesn't make any sense. Now, I think it does for vegans. It's a little bit like saying, this farm is cruel, go vegan. For vegans, that sentence makes sense. For cultural speciesists, it doesn't, because there's a heck of a lot in between those two ideas.
Yeah, you don't want to give people the idea that they can eat pig meat or any form of meat or any form of animal products from any farm and that it'll be okay. Included in the messaging has to be a statement that consuming all animal products is a rights violation of other animals, it causes the oppression of other animals and their exploitation, and we shouldn't be doing it. and that should be always part of them. That should always be part of the messaging. In fact, should be kind of really the main part of the messaging. And these places can be used as an example. Look at what's happening here. These pigs are being oppressed and exploited, but this happens everywhere. And so the solution to that is to go vegan. And I think that's kind of how that kind of can be used. It's a little bit like when people do the save stuff outside a slaughterhouse, that the footage from that can be used on the street to attract public attention. But it isn't just. But the message you give to people isn't like, what we want you to do is help us close this slaughterhouse down. the message needs to be, what we want you to do is to go
well,
vegan.
That's an interesting thing because I mean, we were supposed to go back on the street this last Sunday, but one of our party injured themselves, and so we've had to put it back a couple of weeks. But I started to put out on social media because I got lots of pictures of people looking at our banners, the 7-foot tall banners. But I did notice there's a heck of a lot of people looking at the one that we actually did take from the save. So it was a lot of pictures of, the usual stereotypical slaughterhouse truck pictures that you get, looking through the slats and the eye looking out and all this kind of stuff. And what we noticed was that people were focusing on that particular banner, but that meant that campaign doesn't just stay outside the slaughterhouse. We brought it into a center, and people were then thinking, "Wow, I know where that is. This is like 30 miles north of here," kind of thing. And it made it real, and it was as though we were able to move people kind of conceptually to the slaughterhouse, but we also were able to bring the victims of the slaughterhouse to the people. So in that sense, your model works completely brilliantly in the sense that you're doing something which is active. And then in terms of the material that you collect while doing that, you then translate that directly into vegan education.
Yeah. So I think it's kind of, when people are going and doing the activism, what they need to think of is what is the main aim and what I'm doing. And it really always has to be the main aim of what I'm doing is to raise awareness so that people go vegan, right? And that as that's what needs to be in their head, and that needs to be kind of how they carry out the action, how they kind of frame what they say afterwards to the media and indeed what they say in general. And that's the kind of to look at it as an awareness raising exercise rather than to look at the main aim is to close the farm down. The main aim is to somehow persuade an totally intransigent government to kind of do anything. And it's a bit like going back to the animal rebellion actions.
It's got to be like an expose, isn't it?
Yeah. You see, it's like going back to the animal rebellion actions against the dairy industry in last September. That kind of, I think there are a lot of confused messages kind of come from them. Although I am in solidarity really with kind of what they do. In that, like, whereas it was kind of framed like the aim of that was to somehow put pressure on the government, so the government would kind of create a plant-based future, which they're not going to do. This government that we've got is never going to do that. It's totally speciesist, neoliberal, grasping, horrible, greedy bastards. Arseholes.
Well, I mean, there's a campaign now asking Sunak to tighten up on the live exports, isn't
there? Yeah. But you see, what that has to be, any actions like that, the number one aim of it should be awareness raising. It should be aimed at the public in terms of awareness raising. So and to create an awareness that will cause people to go vegan. Because if that happens, then what happens is you create more vegans. If you create more vegans, you create more vegan politicians, and if you create and then you've got more vegans to vote for those politicians. So we completely eventually would change the nature of the administration, and that's the only way that we're going to get what we want. We're not going to get anything out of governments like we've got now, and which really exists all over the world. We've got to change the nature of those governments.
It's a total pipe dream. We're getting more and more right wing governments.
Yeah, exactly.
It's shit about anybody, and then you're going, oh, what is your stance on the animals? And
you're just throwing yourself, bashing your head against a brick wall. To be quite honest, and the only way to get rid of that brick wall is through vegan education, because because you change the culture, you change the politics, and it doesn't mean you have to change everyone. I think it's probably, the figure's been mentioned, 25%. If we get 25% of the population on board, then that rapidly, you can rapidly move to widespread change. I mean, we've got to remember that our current government, here in the UK was elected by less than 30% of people eligible to vote, and that's probably the same with administrations throughout the world. That they, you know, they haven't been elected by like a majority of the electorate.
Here's a question for you, Ronnie. Do you think we're in a optimistic movement or a pessimistic movement?
Well, personally, I'm neither. I don't know about. I kind of don't know about other people. You know, I take the view. What is necessary if we are going to succeed. What is required to be done? If we are going to succeed, what is required to be done? And we need to work out what's required to be done, and we need to go for it. And that's what we can do. You know, we don't know what's going to happen, but you know, we can work out what we need to do. You see?
Yeah. Well, I think. I mean, over the years, I've met a lot of people who have kind of been a bit ground down a little bit. It's almost as though you get that kind of first 10 years of, yeah, we're going to do it, you know, and then you realize that it's rather going to be a longer haul than that. And so people then start to think, well, are we going to do it? And then they start to think, well, maybe we're trying to tackle something that's too big, going back to what I said before. And so therefore you start looking for smaller things. And I think there's a lot of people in the movement that do that.
Yes, but I think there's the thing is that even the smaller things, that unless you know, we've got to appreciate how small those things are in comparison with the edifice of the oppression of other animals. You know, I mean, just the food industry, that's 50,000 other animals are slaughtered every second by the food industry worldwide. And if you look at the number of animals killed to feed the UK population, it's 8 billion a year. 8 billion a year. And it's like horrendous, you know, and so that's the kind of like most horrendous issue. So I'd say that's the issue we have to kind of tackle first, you know, in the sense that with ordinary people, the main thing that almost everyone does in their everyday life in terms of contributing to the oppression of other animals is through their consumption of animal products. I mean, most people don't hunt. Most people, you know, don't carry out animal experimentation, for instance.
Yeah, they don't go to circuses,
but they don't. They're not, you know, they don't. You know, but they do consume animal products, and so that they contribute everyone to the biggest form of oppression of other animals in terms of numbers that exists.
Well, not only that, they consume other animals when they're doing the other things as well. I mean, if somebody goes to a circus,
yeah, exactly. So, but you see, if we're ever going to and of course, it tackles all these other things as well. You know, if we had a vegan-run administration, you know, we would be rid of animal experimentation. We would be rid of hunting. That administration would get rid, you know, would make those things illegal and would enforce, you know, would strongly enforce that law. Unlike what's happening with the Hunting Act. You know, then that's the only way, because otherwise, what happens if the approach is pressure campaigning, as soon as the pressure campaigns look like they're going to succeed in any big way, the state will crack down on the campaigners, and we've seen this historically. You know, look what happened to the ALF, look what happened to SHAC, look what happened to Speak here in the UK. Well, and indeed in other countries as well. I mean, it was SHAC in the USA as well, of course, where you know where lots of activists were thrown in prison. That's what will happen unless you do something to change the nature of the administration. Then the administration will move to stop any pressure campaign as soon as that looks like it's really going to get somewhere.
Yeah, well, also, you know, again, we're talking about kind of cultural speciesism, but that means we're talking about culture and then cultural change. Now, if you think about the days when, before the seatbelts and before the no smoking in cinemas and pubs and that kind of stuff, if you'd have gone back to those days in the 50s and did a poll, most people would say you've got no chance, mate. You know, you forget it, right? And so it's not just because it's made illegal, because the pressure to adhere to those new norms are social. It comes from the culture. So it's not as though you've got to have a copper at every, you know, every kind of light to see if everybody's got seatbelts on. You need that. I mean, the culture applies the pressure in the end, and so that's what will create the change. Social, pressure.
Yeah, it's kind of a combination of both, in a sense, in terms of, like, if it's something that, like, most people are involved in, then that cultural change is like vitally important, and is what will get you there, because as you quite rightly say, you can't police everywhere to stop people doing something that everyone was previously involved in. But the need for political change is kind of really important as well. For instance, if you look at something like hunting, hunting in the UK, and we've got a law banning it now, and that law is not very strong and not enforced. But you see, for decades and decades and decades and decades,
bit of an understatement.
Yeah, that is an understatement. Yeah, very much so. But for decades and decades and decades, public opinion polls showed vast majorities of people opposed to hunting. Right. So despite the fact that loads of people were opposed to it, it wasn't banned. It wasn't banned until 20 years ago. Well, I mean, it's not really banned, but there was no legislation brought in to curb it until 20 years ago. You see, so you kind of need that combination of cultural change and plus, the legislation as well to kind of.
Well, it's a perfect example, though, because there was a class-based thing that, I mean, essentially what you had there from a kind of Marxist analysis is that you had the proletariat wanting something, but the ruling class going no, right? Which is what it would be like if we were to try to now go to the existing administration in Britain, for example, and ask them for anything. I mean, the best they're going to do is go, we'll give you a little bit of welfare, we'll drop that from the table. But they're never going to do anything fundamental. It's not in their class or economic interest, is it?
And that's why campaigns aimed at kind of moving the governments are kind of not the best use of energy and resources. That the campaigns we need to do are campaigns that will move ordinary people and will change the mindset of ordinary people. So
it's got to be culture first. Now,
yes.
So I've been trying to monitor the conversation as we're going, and there's been lots of interesting stuff. I'm going to try and remember where they all are, but this is really feeding into what we've already talked about. In particular, your thing, Ronnie, about vegan education, and there's some kind of things about, well, where do you start with that? For example, the first one I saw was from Graham, and he was saying about this notion of animal rights, and he's saying that these people have never heard of rights before, which is because a little later we get arguments about, well, we should start with health or environment. I think that's
yeah.
But I mean, this is a movement issue in the sense that we don't teach the movement how to talk about rights. But first of all, people never hearing about. I mean, people have not heard about human rights. It seems a bit, I mean, like, I'm speaking to a small group of people about veganism today and animal rights. They had never heard of rights before. So I don't know whether that means
I think people had, I think most people have kind of obviously heard about human rights in some context. And it's a question of saying, well, humans have got the right not to be treated in a particular way. And that right is respected, and that right is recognized in law. But animals are other animals fundamentally no different, so it should be the same for them. That's how you.
Yeah, well, I mean, the thing is, animal rights is an extension of human rights thinking in a small kind of moderate way. I put a video about that up today, but that's the idea of it. So the people who formulated animal rights theory began with human rights, and almost like say which of these concepts and principles go over the justice barrier. And so academics say that Tom Reagan was the first philosopher who successfully got the idea of rights over the species barrier. And it seems to me that the idea of vegan animal liberation is to get the idea of justice over the species barrier as well. So that's our kind of job.
Yes.
But it's a question of, a lot of people would say, Yeah, but that's not where you would start the conversation. People, again, it's kind of like, is that the hard way of doing it, or is there an easy way of doing it? Like, let's talk about the environmental health or something else. I'll try and find the other comments.
I think there's things that can be used to attract. I mean, kind of going back to, you know, what we're, you know, like the kind of title of this animal liberation in the land of arseholes, that kind of like when we've got, you know, seeming like we've got a government of like of arseholes, right? So like, how do you change that? Well, you change that through vegan education, because like I've said already, through vegan education, you get more vegan politicians, more people to vote for them. You change the nature of the administration. So it's vegan education that where you get a government that's no longer.
But you're changing them by boycotting, not boycotting, that's the wrong word. You're changing them by bypassing them. You don't go to them to create change.
No, you don't go to them, because no point in going to them, because it's speciesist and human supremacist. You go, you don't go to them, you get rid of them and you replace them by people that are animal liberationists and that are vegan. And the way you do that is creating more vegans, and therefore some of those vegans want to be politicians, and then you have more vegans to vote those politicians into office. So that's how you deal with the government of arseholes, right? Okay. The next thing is, how do you deal with like the population of arseholes? How you know, how do we cope with the problem of like most people not giving a shit about anything apart from their tiny little life that's right in front of their eyes, and not caring about any, you know, bigger issues, including, you know.
Well, if that's true, I mean, that's a rather pejorative statement. I mean, like we could have a population where a lot of people care about a lot of things. It's just that there's no dot connecting, perhaps.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think the thing is that you kind of, but you know, we kind of are faced with, you know, a situation where it does appear that most people are kind of, you know.
Well, I mean, I agree with you actually, Ronnie, because if you read TikTok comments, you'd think that these people don't give a shit about
kind of how do you know, like, you know, how would you kind of remain so you're not discouraged from that and give up and think there's no point because there's just so many arseholes around that, you know, we can't do anything. And I think kind of how you look at that is like, first of all, like, we don't need to change everyone. You know, we probably only need to change like 25% of people before you get this rapid, you know, it's rapid, you know, culture change. So you don't have to worry about the person that goes past and shouts bacon or whatever.
Because it's 1 in 4 though, Ronnie.
Yeah, you know, it's 1 in 4, but it's not it's not 4 in 4. So it's a lot more doable than probably, you know, most people think. And even that situation of like reaching the 25%, you know, you with that you've still got this kind of I think what you might call exponential growth is still involved in that kind of once you reach kind of, you know, 5%, then it's quicker to reach 10%, and once you reach 10%, it's quicker to reach 25%, because it kind of, you know, the growth in these things is kind of sort of exponential. And I think we've already seen that a bit with
somebody did the maths once, didn't they? Or for those across the pond, they did the math and worked out that if every vegan created 2 vegans in a year and then on, it would only take about 8 years to have a vegan world.
Yes, yeah. But that would be a world where everyone was vegan. But we don't need a world where everyone's vegan. We just need a world where vegans are in charge. And in order for us to be in charge, we don't need 100%.
It'd be pretty handy.
It'd be better if everyone was. Yes, I'd love everyone to be an ethical vegan. But like, if we're looking at achieving, you know, what we want as quickly as possible, and achieving what we want in a situation where so many people seem to not give a shit, then you're kind of looking at what's the minimum number of people you can change before we can have.
They don't give a shit, and yet they're arseholes. It's weird, isn't it? Now,
that's right. That's very good. Yeah. Perhaps they're constipated arseholes. You know.
Let me bring up a couple of things. So we've got this idea about educating. Sounds like people will be receptive to it, but they probably won't have that sense of urgency about it when they think about their everyday problems. And so you got that point. And then Colleen backed that up and said, a sense of urgency is important. Now, the interesting thing about that is that those people who are into pressure campaigns will say that vegan education is going to take too long, and you're kind of saying to the people who are in favor of pressure campaign, well, that's going to take too long.
Yeah.
So there's no. Where do you get the sense of urgency?
Well, first of all, in order to kind of really make a difference with like pressure campaigns, it kind of will take a long time, because it's not the question of just like closing one place down, because all that does is move the problem around. You'd have to close like loads and loads and loads of them down.
No, but you're missing the point there, Ronnie. You're missing the point, because each time you do, it's a big boost and a victory.
And I think this, and I understand that, but like we have to have people thinking more strategically and at a deeper level, because it's like a Pyrrhic victory. It's a kind of false victory. Everyone's going, getting all happy and, celebrating over something that kind of makes very little difference in the scheme of things, because the problem just moves elsewhere. And that's the sad reality of it. Until you kind of can create, it kind of can be done. I think there's a lot of evidence that the ALF campaign massively reduced the number of animal experiments taking place in the UK. But if you look at the scale of that campaign, if you look at the scale of direct action that took place, if you look at the number of people that went to prison in connection with that, it was like a kind of huge campaign that we would never be able to resurrect these days for various reasons. And it still didn't end animal experimentation. It reduced it, and of course that's that kind of is valuable, but it didn't achieve animal liberation, and could never achieve animal liberation.
Yeah, well, I think one difference between the two ideas, which is worth pointing out, is that if there's a resurrection of pressure campaigns, that's where the state tends to step in, either by defending the target or by arresting the people. And so you're gonna end up with people going back to jail, as you just said. Now, so far they haven't made door dropping and those kind of things illegal. Whether it ever will is another matter. But
I think there's some that there's some that would love to, and of course there are some countries where people can't deliver leaflets to people's homes, like in the USA, for instance, although they can distribute them in other ways, obviously. But it would be very, very, very difficult to make education illegal. They'd kind of have a very difficult task to do that.
I've seen all those North American films. All you got to do is get a bike and run around the thing, and you just throw things into their yard.
That's what they do. That's kind of what they do with the newspapers. They throw them on the drive. They throw them on the drive. You could put them under the windscreen wipers of the vehicles that are parked there, of course, I suppose. But yeah, I think that that's the problem. As I said, once any pressure campaign looks like it's going to achieve like some kind of really like kind of big change. I mean, if you sort of say look at at the Shack campaign. Now the Shack campaign, the name of the Shack campaign wasn't to end animal experimentation. I mean, possibly it might have been their long-term aim, but like they didn't even succeed in their short-term aim, which was to close Huntington Life Sciences, because of course the government, and it was a very, very concerted campaign, and looked like it was going to succeed, and all the suppliers withdrew from HLS and nobody would give them banking facilities and all that. But of course, in the end, the state stepped in and said, right, that's it. We're not having this anymore. We're going to give support to HLS, keep them going, and we're going to arrest all these activists and put you all in prison. And that's what happened. And so that.
Yeah, but Ronnie, I mean, let's play devil's advocate with you a little bit, in the sense that, let's say, for example, that you take that idea, but vegan education is about altering cultural speciesism. And you could put that in these terms. We want to shut cultural speciesism down. But that's a much bigger thing than HLS, isn't it?
Well, yes, it's a much bigger thing than HLS, but it's the only way that you achieve animal liberation. If we want widespread animal liberation, we want to kind of completely change the world so that animals are no longer oppressed and other animals are no longer expressed.
Well, I think the beauty of vegan education is that you're doing all of it all at once. That's
You're doing
always
all of it all at once.
Do you want to address this one, Ronnie, before we lose it? Because you obviously agree with this. Just so we kind of.
I think it's kind of how it's done. I mean, I think that really it's to do with what is the aim of the direct action? What is the aim of the direct action? And I think when people go and take direct action, that the number one aim should be the main reason I'm doing this is to raise awareness. The main reason I'm doing this is to raise awareness and is to educate the public so that people become opposed to speciesism and so that people become vegan.
Yeah. So everything is an expose.
Everything. So those actions, direct action, kind of needs to be tailored in that way. So that means that there are kind of certain ways that you need to do it. First of all, it's really important that it's non-violent, right? Now, I'm not I'm not a pacifist, and I believe that the use of force is morally justified in certain circumstances, but tactically, if your aim is to educate, then it's totally contradictory to use violence as part of that process. So first of all, those actions kind of need to be non-violent. They need to be the sort of thing that's going to get like media attention, so you can kind of spread the message through the media.
Well, that's where the shock comes in
the shock and the kind of messaging kind of needs to be right. I mean, we did a show, didn't we, a few weeks ago about the action at Sequani, the animal experimentation laboratory, where the women kind of spray paint and stuff. And to me, that's the kind of example of that kind of the sort of action that where primarily it's to raise awareness.
Yeah, I mean, do you think that was shocking in the sense that Amber is getting? You see, the pouring of the milk. I know that wasn't. Well, I suppose it was a vegan group, but the pouring of the cow milk was more shocking than the paint thing, wasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it's shocking to ordinary members of the public, because ordinary members of the public like drink cow milk. But I think that it got sort of a lot of media publicity, but then it's vitally important. The messaging that the activists put out is vitally important in connection with that, and it's vitally important the messaging they put out is anti-speciesist and is calling on people to go vegan, and it's like, where that messaging promotes cultural change. I think that's really important.
Yeah, well, I mean, the messaging is all important. And in fact, Graham, later on, I don't know if we'll get to it, was talking about we ought to do that show about a press release. This was the one that I wanted to bring up as I saw as it passed. And just as a general point, which I should have made at the beginning, really, is, comment away, people, because we don't charge people to speak to us.
We'll send you an invoice later.
Yeah.
We'll send the bailiffs round.
Yeah, I think that's a bit of a grotesque idea, personally, but we'll never do that. So if it goes in the chat,
I think with this, you see, I think that
got a good chance of being ignored like everything else. So
yeah, with this, you see how I look at it. I think that kind of things like health and the environment can be used as a sort of what I would call a kind of gateway. In other words, to give an example of what we do locally with our local vegan group, we'll have stalls at a lot of environmental events, and the reason we're able to get into the environmental events is because of the because the advantages of adopting a plant diet, for the climate and for the environment. We're in there because of the environmental benefits of a vegan diet, rather than because of veganism. But like, once we've got in there, then we can educate people in there about speciesism, and about why it's wrong to
So, yeah, okay. So let's fill in the actual detail, rather than, for example, we've got this idea, a good idea of starting with topics of health. So you're saying so how do you start with the topic of health? You mean the posters?
Well, we kind of don't really. We don't really start with topic health. What happens is, the reason why we get into those events is because of the environmental benefits of a vegan diet, right? It's like we've had stalls at health events because we've pitched it. We've said, oh, you know, because of the health benefits.
So you're talking about the conversation you have with the organisers of these things.
The organisers, yeah. Once you're in there, you know, you have your information.
You can do what you want.
People come up to the stall and you've got your information, and obviously, you know, some of that information does, you know, it kind of does talk about the health benefits of a vegan diet. It does talk about the environmental aspects, but we make sure everyone gets information about ethical veganism. You know,
yeah, but I'm still wanting to know about how you kind of organize things that you can start with that and then go on. But I mean, you're not kind of starting with that with everybody who comes up to the stall, are you?
No. Well, it depends on kind of what the person says. You know, people come up to the stall and they talk about that, but then you
see, that's what I'd say depending on what they say. But I mean, there's no point in somebody goes, oh, I'm really interested in animal rights, and you go, oh, well, let's talk about health first. So
no, that's right. But if people start to, I mean, you can kind of talk about, you know, because I will say, well, you know, I tend to talk about myself because it kind of isn't. So I think people perceive that.
And it's such a rare thing too, Ronnie.
Yeah, talk about, there's not a lot to say, is there, really, to be honest? I've got a really boring life. No, but it's because people don't see it as so threatening. I say, well, the reason I did it was because of, you know, being opposed to the oppression of other animals and what happens to the other animals. You know, that's the reason I stopped eating animal products. You know, and I'll kind of put it like that rather than saying the reason you should do it is, and you should do this, and you should do that, and you should do that.
Yeah, it's proving
psychologically that isn't good. Yeah, psychologically that isn't a good thing to do. So I was talking about me. I mean, like for instance, I was a huge meat eater before I became vegetarian and vegan. So that kind of always, you know, kind of helps in a sense.
Yeah, that same tactic is being used on TikTok, where people say, well, you know, I'm vegan now for you know 5 years, but I used to work in Burger King, and I used to be, you know, I used to go to zoos, and you know, I've betted on the horses. And
yeah,
I even was a troll. You know, I used to call vegetarians names and stuff. You know.
Yeah, well, I mean, I used to go fishing. I used to bet on horses. You know, I've done a few species things, you know, before I became aware, you know, and like
a very bad man, that Ronnie Lee.
I was really bad. I've, you know, yes, yeah, but then like most, probably like most humans, you know, unless they were kind of brought up in a vegan family and educated.
What do you think about the last sentence here, though, Ronnie? Because in some ways, we've got to take that on board. Accept it if we do accept it, but then we've got to kind of transform this, haven't we?
We've got to transform it, but it's kind of people's.
Transcend it is the word.
You kind of hear this about the, you know, the people's circle of compassion or circle of concern. Like most people aren't like entirely self-centric. Most people will have concern for some others. It may be some others in their family. It may be their, you know, their cat and dog that they've got at home. You know, that you know, they're kind of what you might call a circle of compassion. You know, does include other humans and will very often include some other animals. And an extension of so they're not entirely self-centric. It's just that kind of, you know, there are limits to the others that they are concerned about, and it's just a question of like getting to expand that circle, so to speak.
Yeah, this is just a message to me. Well, Graham, we're working hard to scratch your itch, so don't worry about that.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's, you know, how to do a press release. You do a press release like what you write is something that they could just put straight in the paper without editing it. You know, you write it as if it's an article. You like write an article.
That's what Amber's saying here too.
Yeah, that's kind of how you do it.
Yeah, they're very pushed for time now, journalists, aren't they?
Yeah, and don't make it too long, because the trouble is, you make it too long, they'll chop it around, and then quite often it loses a lot of sense. You need to write it, you know, fairly short. You know, kind of maybe say the most important things first. Have quotes from one or two people. If you look at other articles in the paper and how they're formulated, the ones written by journalists, then write your press release similar to those articles, if you see what I mean. And that's kind of the best chance you've got. I've written press release, and sometimes they just put it straight in the newspaper without changing anything, because they're just so kind of either lazy or push for time or whatever. Especially in local,
or it might have been that threat at the bottom that you put in there.
The threat that I know where you live. Yeah. P.S. I know where you live. It always works.
I think this is saying what you were saying, really, that the fact that you kind of validate what people say. A process of inviting people into a space where experience with that knowledge. Yeah, I think so.
I think the thing is, we've all been there. That there are very few vegans that at one stage weren't vegan. And so we've all been there as people that weren't vegan, and then something.
Yeah, I think it's a mistake of some of the influencers. You'd almost think they were born vegan the way they talk sometimes.
Yes, yeah, and I think you've got to kind of appreciate that kind of, people don't understand things in the same way as we didn't understand before we became vegan. But the other point about because we've covered the two areas of the arseholes, haven't we? Really. There was the three categories of arseholes, weren't there? There was the government arseholes, there was the ordinary people arseholes, but then there was the kind of vegan arseholes, wasn't there? The non-active vegans.
Do you want to go there?
Yeah. What to the arsehole of a non-active vegan?
Right.
Well, that's kind of, there'd be a lot of cake around there. It'd be cake with cake, wouldn't it? Well, it's just, and there's kind of two aspects of that. It's okay, first of all, how do we kind of get those people active? That's the kind of first thing, where you've got people that are kind of,
we don't know, do we?
Somehow resistant to activism. Well, they're kind of. I think there's kind of.
It's not as though we haven't tried, Ronnie. I mean,
no, it's not. Well, we've kind of tried and we haven't tried. You see, and I think one of the ways that we
explain.
One of the ways we haven't tried is because of the nature of activism. You see, that kind of most vegan outreach takes place in the centre of big cities, and it's stuff like, Cube of Truth and Earthlings Experience, those things. We've got people all come together from the surrounding area, and they do an event in the centre of a big city, right? Well, if that is the only form that vegan outreach takes, and if that's the only form in which it is promoted, and if that's the only form that people somehow consider to be valid, then you're excluding loads of vegans from outreach. Because what about those vegans that kind of can't or don't want to go into the center of a big city? What about those vegans whose kind of the way their life operates kind of makes it difficult for them to go to an event at the time when those events go on? I mean, they're normally on a weekend, aren't they, on a Saturday? If we think that that's all vegan outreach is, that excludes a load of vegans from taking part in outreach. So we need to kind of, look at forms of outreach that as many vegans as possible can kind of take part in. And I'd say that there's kind of fundamentally two types of outreach. There's everyday life outreach, right? And there is outreach people can do as they're going about their everyday life. And I'll give an example of that. Like if I'm on a bus or on a train, I have leaflets with me, and I'll leave one on the seat. If I go in a library and I've got time, I'll put vegan leaflets in books. If I'm in somewhere where there are magazines, I put them in the magazines. I leave them on a table in a waiting room, stuff like that. I'm going about my everyday life, and I'm taking a little bit of time. For instance, if someone's got a sticker in their car about dog rescue or something, I'll put a vegan leaflet under their windscreen wiper, because I may not have time to put leaflets under every single windscreen wiper of every vehicle in the car park, but there's a person there that cares about some animals, so they're probably kind of more likely to be receptive to the vegan message than other people. So if I have a few seconds to spare, do that. You see, and that's as I'm going about my everyday life. And everyone can do that. Everyone can do kind of stuff like that, like in their everyday life. There's that. And then there's the type of outreach where you kind of go out of your way a bit, where you're going out of your way. It's kind of doing something additional to your everyday life. And there's, really simple aspects of that. There's certainly here in the UK and in other countries, we can do door dropping, where we put leaflets through the letterboxes of people's homes. Probably an alternative that in maybe in the USA would be put them under the windshield wipers of cars in a parking lot, perhaps, if you're allowed to do that. Holding
paper planes and
holding or kind of just leave them in people's porches or something if you're not allowed to put them in the mailbox because it belongs to the mail company. I think that's the reason. And stuff like kind of, you know, holding information stores,
Just on that point, though, Ronnie, before we kind of dismiss the US as a block, I mean, presumably those kind of bylaws or whatever they're called might be state by state. So it'd be worth checking out the regulations wherever you live, right?
It may be state by state. From people I know in the US, in various states, it seems to apply to all of them, but it may not necessarily apply to every state. I don't know what the situation is in Canada, for instance. That's the, you know, that may be different. I mean, obviously, we know in the UK and Ireland you can deliver leaflets to people's homes because we do it. But you know, distributing.
I just found a brilliant door dropping street. Every single house except for one, I think, didn't even have any gates. It was just like straight into you know, so everyone had a car, but they didn't have any gates behind the car. So
right, yeah,
you know, that kind of thing.
I mean, terraces are great. You know, we have a lot of terraces over here, and like it's kind of
you got the door on the street.
Doors on the street, and there's only a few yards between each letterbox, and I can do 200 in an hour of those. You know, whereas other places like where I live in the village,
you can do it quicker, you know, Ronnie. You put 200 in one door, and then you're done.
200 in one. That's it. Yeah, they can read about veganism 200 times.
Please give to your neighbours.
About to go vegan. Yeah. You see, and all there's information stalls in the street or at events. And I mean, I do a lot of information stalls myself, just on my own. You know, at events. I mean, you know, it's good if, you know, more than one person can take, you know, can take part, but sometimes on a small scale, these are things people can do on their own. And then, but you see, those things don't involve, like say with the door drop-in, or just going somewhere and distributing. You see, another thing we do, like if there's an event that is somehow kind of connected, you can see a connection between that and veganism. Like say it's someone's doing a talk about the environment, or we had a talk at our town hall where somebody had gone to South America and they were trying to stop the canned hunting. They do this canned hunting of lions in South America, and there's a woman that was a campaigner against that, and she gave a talk at the town hall. Well, a few of us from the vegan group went along to that, and afterwards we gave everyone a booklet about veganism. It was a recipe booklet, but it also had the ethical, you know, aspects in it as well. We gave that to everyone attending this because these were people that kind of already cared about some animals, so there was something there to kind of work on, if you see what I mean. And you know, so events like that.
You know, I'm a bit wary of that construction. You mentioned dogs before. I'm not quite sure whether anybody's sticker which say, you know, for life and not for Christmas thing means anything in the scheme of things, because some of the most stubborn species are dog lovers. So you know,
I think that's true, but it's just that you see, if you if you're not able to put leaflets under every person's windscreen wiper in the car,
you're trying to find an indication.
You're trying to target someone that has kind of some sympathy for. I remember I did it to one, and the woman got in touch with me afterwards because she suspected it was me because she was already vegan. She said, "Did you put the thing on?" I said, "Well, yeah." She said, "Well, you know, it was my car and I'm already vegan." I'm like, "Oh, great, that's good. Can I have the leaflet back?" So yeah, and environmental events, you know, leaflets that kind of lead with the environmental advantages of a vegan diet, but then also talk about the ethics. They can be given to people who are attending environmental events. So this kind of there you've got your kind of targeted leafleting. So the leaflets are unlikely to be they're going to probably be more effective than just generally giving them out in the street, which of course you can do as well. Just give them out to shoppers and stuff.
Oh, that's quite expensive in terms
that
of
can be expensive. We do it at Christmas. We'll dress up as Santa and give.
It is a lot better to let them come to you, though.
Yeah, I think if you have a board that says, that will can't, because what you're trying to do is filter out the people that are just going to chuck the leaflet in the bin, aren't you? So if you have a board, a stall is a filter, really, because
I'll tell you one of the most important things to have if you're giving leaflets out is a sign saying free leaflets, because people expect you to be a chugger, and that you're gonna be wanting the bank details.
Free information or something. Yeah, absolutely, because that's the real problem, the chuggers, to be honest. But but these are things that, like, first of all, with the door drop-in, people can do it anytime they want. They're not tied. They don't have to travel miles to big city. Like if people are living in, a small town or a village or the suburb of a city where they may not be able to travel into the centre to take part in one of these kind of big outreach events, they can still do stuff locally. And with door dropping, they can do it anytime they want. They're not tied to a particular time where everyone's meeting up. And also with the information stores, you're not traveling. You're not having to travel any distances. It's in your own locality. It might even be in your own local community centre and stuff like that. And kind of, so what we kind of need, if we're going to get more vegans involved in outreach, we need to do the type of outreach that more vegans can get involved in, right?
Yeah. Also, I think there's a knock-on effect. I mean, if I think back to the model of the 1980s that I was familiar with in the north of England, not so much down when I was in Essex, because everybody got sucked into London then. But when we were in the north of England, that incorporated Manchester, Liverpool, places like Bolton, places like Leeds, Bradford, all the way over to places like Sheffield, certainly. And so what you had there is a model which was based on local things, regional things, and then national things. And the national things are almost like what the internet does now, which is kind of networking and enables you to kind of be in contact with people that you don't ever see and this kind of stuff. It's almost like a national event probably doesn't really have that kind of function. They were very important in those days, but certainly there was a relationship between the regional stuff and the local stuff, because each inspired the other, in the sense that people who were doing stuff locally might get involved with the regional thing. And then if they went to a regional thing, they might go, oh, I can do, because everybody gives a report about what they've been doing, and they go, oh, I can do that at my place. And so this kind of regional, kind of like almost like the animal liberation leagues, would be quite good to resurrect if you could.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not against, it's not that I'm against people going to the centre of a big city and doing things. I think those things are great. And every so often, people could do that and all get together and do a big, spectacular thing in the middle of a big city. But but like other times, like what I'd like to say to see is, I'd like to see more people who are just activists becoming like instigators of outreach in their local area and recruiting local vegans to do localized things, if you see what I mean.
Get back to the kind of headspace where you don't have to wait. You don't have to wait for somebody else to organize it.
Just, think like, kind of, how can I maximize the amount of outreach I do? In other words, I'll maximize my everyday life outreach. I'll carry some leaflets around with you, get some leaflets, carry them around with me. And, anytime I can, I'll kind of leave them around. I'll put them places as I'm going about my everyday life. And the second thing is to think, how much of like my spare time, how can I maximize the amount of spare time that I can kind of devote to outreach? In other words, like stuff I can do just on my own, like door dropping, or kind of recruit other local vegans, and we'll do stuff that maybe is better done with more than one person, like an information stall or something like that. I mean,
I think that's the key to it. For ones and twos and threes of people to get together and go, okay, what can we do? What do we want to do? Because it's probably true that in the last 10 years, there's been a very limited range of things which count almost as activism.
Yes.
And so I think we need to kind of question that at least, not necessarily say that's not valid. It's just that that's not all.
No. And I think the other thing, I mean, coming back to the kind of area that I was saying about, the problem we have in having so few vegans that are activists, that kind of local community activism enables more vegans to get involved in activism. That's the first thing. But secondly, you don't need so many people to make it effective. In other words, if you're doing a stall at if you're doing an event in the middle of a big city, you probably think, oh, we need like half a dozen people, or to make that effective, because we're in this big space and we've got all these props and different things to make it look good. But you do, you're in a small town or a suburb of a city or a village or somewhere like that, and you're doing you're doing an outreach event. I mean, like door dropping, do with one person, or you can get a couple of you together and do it.
Yeah, I mean, twos and threes is good, but
twos
one
and
will
threes,
do, won't it?
yeah. Or an information stall, whether it's in the street or whether it's at a community event. You can easily do that with just a couple of people. Or I mean, I do them on my own, but I mean, it's better to kind of have someone with you and stuff, obviously, but these are kind of where you're kind of using.
You need somebody with you, Ronnie, in case your pacemaker stops. Now,
yeah, that's right. You had to resuscitate me, like, go and get me cups of tea,
an hour and 20.
Keep me going, so,
But yeah, should we start wrapping this up?
Yes, I think so. So I think that's the thing, that this is kind of what I've talked about. Is yes, it can seem daunting. Like we've got governments that are like totally opposed to anything we want. We've got a population that seems to largely not care, and we've even got a vegan community that doesn't seem to want to get involved in outreach. And it kind of this kind of general arseholism, right? I'd describe it as, right. Can be depressing if you let it be, but what I'm saying is there is a way forward despite that. There is a way in which we can still achieve animal liberation despite that.
Colleen is saying that she'd find it very difficult to be on her own, and
I
understand that.
Yeah, I can understand that, and I must say the events where I tend to do information stalls on my own are really like community events, where there's some kind of local community fair.
And I think, to be honest, we ought to make a gender point here too.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah. So I can understand. I mean, I can understand that as well. But like, I mean, and the answer to that is to, try to recruit other vegans, or maybe do something in a space that's in a safer space. Like book a stall at like a local community event or something where you're in a space that's safer to operate.
I'm just trying to entice the cat onto my knee, but she won't.
Oh, right.
Yes. She's just moaning at me now. So
yeah.
Right. Well, in relation to, as it were, expanding our vision of what vegan outreach can do, we've been interested in the last few weeks of going through this 50 different types, and we know that a few of them have been a bit weird, but some of them have been okay. So we're going to have a final kind of program on that where we kind of pick our 10 best. So all the ones that we think are probably pretty good can all be in one place, and so that's going to be for next week, Ronnie, right?
Yes, and that's well worth looking at, because I mean, we've got to look through and decide which one's the best. There's one or two that I could kind of immediately think of.
Colleen said, a woman in her 60s with pamphlets on the street in a farming community. Can you imagine? I can't see any problem with that, really. Can you?
Yeah, I think there would be certain kind of problems with that, but I think there's kind of yeah, that would be difficult. But I think there may be, there may be some events locally that attract, kind of certain types of people. Like locally, we have kind of like eco events, greener living fairs and stuff, where we have stalls, and obviously they're going to attract a certain type of person who's kind of
maybe that's another thing which is really interesting. I mean, it's come up in a different context with me recently, but this idea of kind of stay in your lane, it's almost as though maybe a lot of animal advocates don't think about, there's an eco event, because they kind of think, well, that's not.
But there's a connection, you see. There's a connection.
Yeah, but they wouldn't necessarily. In fact, they might not only not see it, they'd actually might deny it.
Well, the thing is that you see, it's once again you've got kind of people going along to that event that care about something, other than just their tiny little, personal life type of thing. They're probably, concerned about the planet.
This is important for me in the sense that we get told that there's this thing where vegans are expected to do everything, but people in other groups, not only do they not support the vegans, which is not true because there's quite a lot of them who move around those things, but also it's as though we're not allowed to call them out on their speciesism, which is also not true. Everybody, whether they're in another progressive organization or just anybody else, should be called out on the fact that they're not vegan. There's nobody exempt from that.
No, not at all, not at all. But I think it's there are probably groups of people that are more likely to kind of be won over, or whatever the right term is, and I think like a kind of eco fair, there'll be, but it doesn't necessarily. I mean, we've done stalls at like ordinary community fairs, at like family fun days and stuff, that where like anyone can go along,
And so how would you market yourself for that? I mean, would you contact the organizer and say we're a local animal welfare group or something like that?
No, I'll just say the name of our group. We're just we're a vegan group, and they say, what you're going to have on your stall, and I say, well, information about veganism and recipe booklets.
Well, I mean, that's very encouraging to me, because it's another indication that veganism is no longer a scare word, which is great. I mean, if organizers, because I mean, going back in time, people would be a bit wary, and they, like you to say.
I mean, part of the reason might be it usually costs, a relatively small amount of money to kind of. I think some of these stores, maybe it costs £15 or something. So I think they might be a little bit motivated in wanting the money and wanting to have as many stores as possible.
Yeah, but again, they'd still back in the day, they'd still be wary if you said.
I think that's kind of true. I mean, I'm kind of there's one of our local parks is doing. They've got a kind of big day in celebration of the coronation of King Charles.
Who?
King, King. Is it King Charles? That's the latest one.
That's a breed of dog, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a breed of dog. Yeah, that's right. Okay. Yes, that's probably what he's named after. But like, it's his coronation coming up. Well, we've been invited to do a stall at this event where there's going to be loads of stalls, and kind of.
And is that because there's been a lot of publicity about him?
No, I think it's just they just want like lots of community groups to. We're seen as like a community.
Group. I just wondered whether it was them connecting a few dots, because there's been quite a bit of publicity about Charles having kind of vegan.
We did
catering
one.
And that kind of,
we did one at the Queen. We did one at the Queen's Jubilee event.
Yeah, but she didn't give a shit about other animals.
So it was just like this big event, and like. Everyone had the Union Jack or the butcher's apron.
She was an arsehole towards the other animals. She was.
She was. Well, I think so's Charles. He's been a terrible arsehole towards other animals as well. Do
you think he's still in favour of fox hunting and stuff?
I honestly don't know. I really don't know. But I know he owns lots of land where animals are farmed.
But with that kind of person, with those kind of contacts, it could well be that someone like Charles, and I'm not kind of promoting him or anything, could well have been influenced over the years now by people like David Attenborough and by George Monbiot, that and that Chris Packham. Those are the kind of people that would be able to get his ear, wouldn't they?
Yeah, I mean, possibly to some extent, but I think kind of, it's. I feel a bit torn because I'm totally against the monarchy, and I feel.
I'm trying to set that bit aside. I mean, that was just a given for everybody.
Yeah. And it's do we do a stall at this event that's promoting the monarchy?
Yeah.
And do we kind of say, okay, that's bad, but the plus.
It's not very anarchic, Ronnie. It's not very anarchic.
But the plus side of it, does the plus side of it outweigh the negative? And there's going to be lots of people there that we can educate to go vegan. Do you see what I mean? It's like one of
We're getting
those
all
things.
utilitarian now.
But I always have the vegan flag. They've all got the butcher's apron flying, and I have the vegan flag flying. So at least we haven't got the bloody
right, people.
Flag.
We're a bit out of time, so
yes,
I'm going to draw this to a conclusion. Thanks so much for tuning in. We'll do this final one of the ideas next time, and for this coming Thursday, I've got a pretty good time tunnel because we're talking about when the movement shifted to kind of embrace veganism as the moral baseline to the extent that it has. Because there is still, even now, some pushback or arseholery.
Arseholery, yeah. Is that? Have you invented a word now? Is that a word?
Yeah, in the movement.
We'll have to produce a joint dictionary of.
Yeah, well, there's caution about even now. It's interesting, we're 21st century. We're second decade and all that, and yet there's still caution about veganism within the animal movement. To the extent that it's often presented as veganism is kind of one of the things you can do rather than it's the thing to do, and so there's still some of that. And so
yes,
we'll kind of chart, the timeline is interesting. It goes from 1990 up to today, really. And so there's still little kind of remnants of people being a bit squeamish about veganism, even within the vegan community. And I think that is a fascinating kind of phenomenon, really, but it is true. So there you go. So that's going to be this Thursday, so do join me, 7 p.m. my time, and we'll be back next Tuesday for the other thing. And we shall be back, Ronnie, providing that
we are both still alive,
both of us. Yeah.